Hey everyone, my name is Marta and I'm one of last year's designers in residence of the Design Museum of London. And I am a fashion designer specialized in design research and communication. And my work focuses on using design to explore the impact of emerging technologies in our society. And for the Designers in Residence program, I chose to explore an emerging material called graphene, which some of you might have heard of. And it's a material which is composed of a one atom thick layer of carbon. And in its purest form, it holds incredible properties such as being superconductive, lightweight, really strong, and very flexible. And through the residency, I was very lucky to be able to collaborate with the Cambridge Graphene Centre in the UK. And I was researching how this really exciting material could be used in very different areas. And one of the properties that I decided to focus on was its ability to reinforce other materials. So if you mix graphene with certain materials, its mechanical properties have the ability of making that other material stronger, more resistant, and more durable. And as part of the research, I was focusing on understanding how graphene could be used within the footwear industry to create durable and enduring materials that can also be decomposed. So the issue that I was focusing on was that currently shoes such as sneakers are primarily made up of a mix of petroleum-based materials, which are fantastic in the sense that they're really durable, but the problem is that they're very hard to take away and recycle. So ideally we could take them apart and keep them always in the system, but currently the infrastructure isn't really there to do that, and they tend to end up in landfill. And I was also really interested in this growing emergence around biomaterials and natural fibers. But the problem with those materials is that they often do not pass the endurance tests that are required to place a new product, a new sneaker into the market. And I was interested in researching and understanding how graphene could actually help with that and make those materials stronger so that they could endure those tests and also be used in high performance products such as sneakers. So for this series of talks, I will be chatting to some very exciting creatives and practitioners who are working in the field of fashion materials and material innovation. And we will be discussing the pressing environmental issues of our time and how these current issues are sort of shifting conversations in industry, both in fashion and materials, and sort of looking at what changes need to happen to make the system better and more sustainable, for lack of a better word. And yeah, before I begin, I will also be showing my short documentary, Demystifying a Wonder Material, where I investigate the graphene industry through the lens of various experts in science and academia.
This is the hexagonal lattice of carbon
It's a
atoms
wonder
called
material, if you like, in
graphene.
the sense of
But an
it's got
amazing new material.
It's not just limited to one little thing.
Forever.
Form of carbon called
to a lot of mind-blowing
You might have heard of the wonder material graphene, an incredible yet invisible super material promising to revolutionize our world.
To answer what is graphene, well, yeah, it's a one atom thick layer of carbon. That is graphene.
Graphene belongs to a new family of nanomaterials, which are completely two-dimensional and can only be isolated by using specialized devices usually found in labs.
And you see there's a darker area on that square? That's actually the layer of graphene sitting on top of the silicon.
Just like diamonds, pencils, and oil, it is formed by carbon, one of the most common elements found on Earth. However, because of its two-dimensional structure, graphene has incredible properties which no other material has shown before. It is stronger than steel, conducts electricity better than copper, and is optically transparent and flexible.
Graphene has a number of unique properties, and because of the combination of its properties has been referred sometimes as a wonder or even a miracle material. My myself, as a scientist and engineer, I prefer not to use such a definition. It is only the use of such properties into devices that will turn graphene into a realistic technology.
Although it holds amazing properties, graphene is still really hard to produce. The process would entail separating gases which contain carbon, or using processes which can extract graphene layers containing graphite. The machinery needed for this is still very specialized and has only recently been adapted for mass production. Graphene can already be purchased online in many different shapes and forms. The reason why it has not yet been adopted on a broad scale is because there is a lack of industry standards which define and regulate the different types of the material.
Not trying to make it all the same, but being able to identify different grades or different parameters of graphene and identify how they can be consistently met by the manufacturers, it's vital to turning it into product.
Because of its thickness and incredible conductive qualities, graphene is predicted to completely disrupt the field of electronics. The majority of patents filed for graphene research are held by consumer electronics companies as well as affiliated research centers. But graphene's material qualities have also sparked the interest of many more fields of research. Due to our current environmental crisis, engineers and scientists around the globe are turning to this new generation of nanomaterials to explore solutions to our current problems.
Graphene-based innovations can be incorporated into smart buildings, automobiles, textiles and wearables, making them more greener, more efficient and more interactive.
From helping transition to renewable energies to helping clean pollution in our air and water, the potential of graphene in offering new alternatives to the way we live is infinite. It is only by understanding these new materials and by making them accessible to everyone that we can really begin to design with them and translate them into useful, sustainable products.
As a wonder material, it's offering many, many interesting properties that we're beginning to explore. I think we're on the foothills of actually discovering what it really can do. Is it a wonder material? It's got every possibility of being so.
Hey, Caroline.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Sorry, it's a very overload of yellow today. I didn't realise that sitting against a yellow wall, I was also wearing yellow.
That's fantastic.
To bring some sunshine to you today.
Absolutely. So much color. I love it. Thanks so much for joining me. It's really good to have you on these talks that I'm organizing for this virtual design festival. I'm going to ask you to give a really short introduction of the work you do so that everyone knows the amazing stuff that you're involved in right now.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so I'm Caroline Till, co-founder and director of Franklin Till. We're a futures research agency and we work with a broad range of global brands and organisations to explore and implement design, material and colour innovation. So working with brands and organisations across the world, we aim to conduct, analyse and creatively communicate research, bringing it to life, mainly through publications and public experiences. And yeah, it's really nice to be asked to speak with you today because at the heart of everything we do is the kind of shared belief that research and innovation in materials specifically is totally integral to a sustainable future.
Cool, thank you. So I think I'm just going to start with the big question, which is kind of, through the work you do in Franklin Till and also the publication you did in Radical Matters, you really explore, let's say, some of the most pressing issues that our society is seeing today, especially in the environmental sector. So what would you say are, I know it's a big question, but what would you say are the biggest environmental issues that are currently challenging, let's say, our material systems and even our society?
Yeah, I think the material world has a massive impact on, issues of climate emergency. Obviously, currently we're in this linear system in our relationship with materials. So broadly speaking, we talk about that being take, make and discard. So we extract raw materials from the planet, we make with them, we convert them, we transform them, using various different mechanical, chemical processes, and then usually we discard them way before the end of their useful life. So all of the three sections in that system are highly problematic, and moreover there's huge amounts of energy being used in the process, and huge volumes of waste is being produced. And that's why people talk often about circularity and us needing to sort of break this linear system and move towards a more circular system in which materials are kept in useful production in closed loops. I was going to touch on actually one of the most interesting things. I know that we have the pleasure of working together in Franklin Hill, and we're working on a really exciting exhibition at the moment, trying to kind of break down and explore the massive topic of climate change. And so we've been in a really privileged position to talk to some amazing sort of researchers and organisations. And one of the most striking conversations for me recently was with the Gaia Foundation. And they were talking particularly about that first stage, the take stage of this linear material system, and talking about the need to move to a post extractivist future. And I think one of the things that we don't talk about often is we're extracting huge volumes of material, but particularly in the way things are going in this shift to smart. So increasingly we rely more and more on digital technology. People often think of that as a positive impact potentially on the environment, that this leads to dematerialization. So the shift to digital is, would likely have a positive impact on the environment. But, really what we're seeing is this huge increasing demand for minerals and metals, iron ore, copper, etc., the main components that go into our digital devices. And the Gaia Foundation have been doing lots of work exploring the impact of this, shift from the fossil fuel economy to the material and metal economy, and saying that this is lacking critical dialogue. So, and they really kind of opened our eyes to the fact that this is one of the major issues that we're facing, that, resources are completely finite, and we're about to embark on new frontiers of extractivism, in which things like deep sea mining being seriously considered. So it's not just about sort of, circularity, but also, in tune with that, how can we move towards a low material economy? And, the fact that we really realistically need to explore degrowth to slow, our rates of consumption and production, and to slow the commodification of nature.
Yeah. I think that's actually, it's a good point, and I had written a few questions, and the next question I wanted to ask you is kind of like what new materials we should be looking at. But from the conversations that we've had through work as well, I think this question has evolved, and I think maybe the question now isn't so much, maybe it's not about new materials, maybe it's about old materials that we already have. Do you think we should be looking more at redesigning that system so that it's way more sustainable in a way, rather than focusing on generating new materials?
I think we're at a really interesting point, and again, I know we've been having some amazing conversations with people like Julia Watson, who recently wrote the book Low Tech, and tech standing for traditional ecological knowledge. And it feels like there is this body of thinking and research that's emerging, this sort of low tech revolution in materials. So she presents this amazing body of sort of multi-generational knowledge, practices and beliefs, and she's kind of presenting the idea that indigenous innovation exists currently isolated from technology. However, it's hugely sophisticated and designed to work sustainably within really complex ecosystems. So how, you know, this notion of looking backwards to be able to go forwards has never felt more pertinent, really. Another person that I wanted to reference that we've been lucky enough to speak to recently in tune with that is architectural designer Etta Madete, based in Nairobi, who works within BuildX and is also a lecturer. And she was explaining that, you know, obviously East Africa has amazing challenges in architectural terms, in terms of building very quickly low cost affordable housing for you know, a burgeoning population that has you know, real needs for safe homes. And you know, she said to this point that architecture has this sense in East Africa that the materials need to have arrived on a ship for them to be you know, fit for purpose, and for them to be high tech, and they need to, you know, and often they're talking about corrugated roofs and, you know, smart glass that's been manufactured in China, and then they're constructing buildings that are just not fit for their climate in particular. She said, you know, then it results in high levels of air conditioning required. So essentially what they're doing at BuildX is trying to move away from this notion that actually, you know, material innovation needs to have been imported to actually look locally. And I think that sense of localization is really important. So looking at what they have locally and how they can innovate with that. And often that's, you know, again, looking backwards to perhaps more primitive ideas. So one of the things they're exploring is using agri-waste and how they can build with sort of mud-like composites, and then they're looking at modularity. They're looking at the and also combining that with technology. So I think that's something that you and I have touched on before, the idea that, you know, things don't need to exist in silos, that they can look at, you know, creating a new material out of something like agricultural waste, but then how can they combine that with digital fabrication and produce kind of modular building blocks. They're also exploring mycelium, so fungus type materials, for particularly like less sexy applications like ceiling tiles, so things that are heavily used but are often made out of really unsustainable materials. So yeah, we've had several conversations recently with amazing companies that are really embracing this sense that you know, a material future is not white and shiny. It's not about high technology and you know, and smart properties, whatever smart means to the individual, but really about looking backwards and looking at perhaps more traditional or indigenous techniques and how they can be sort of you know, revived and reinterpreted.
And I think this is it's great because I working with you, I can see like how you know, you kind of really immerse yourself into like the innovation, the new designers, but you also are really close to industry and you have lots of conversations with industry. With this new sort of emerging look on traditional techniques and this sort of working locally, how do you think that industry can adapt to it? Because I think we often talk about scale and the fact that these new materials are amazing, but sometimes there's a massive problem with them being scalable and actually being adopted to a point where you can, you know, produce something with them. Do you think there's an opportunity here? Do you think that these are technologies or low tech technologies that are scalable?
Yeah, I mean, that's always got to be the approach, hasn't it? That, you know, even innovations that are being explored at prototype level have to be scalable for the impact to be there. And you were absolutely right. I think this is one of the biggest challenges, particularly when we were talking about returning to working with more organic, you know, based material, because there's inconsistencies, and particularly, you know, with recycled materials, often the waste streams are, you know, relatively unreliable because you don't know either the composition of material or the process of manufacture that they've been through. So and I think it's very much all related to systems. So for example, I think like mycelium is an amazing material, and there's some really exciting stuff happening, particularly people like MicroWorks in the US, like really exploring a broad range of applications for a material like mycelium, which obviously, you know, has the ability to degrade like nature does without detriment. But what that means is that we're looking towards a model of transience rather than kind of longevity, and within the built environment, that's just not where our mindset is, and it's not where our systems of certification and, you know, validation are. So if you wanted to build your home out of mycelium bricks, I imagine at this point in time it would be near impossible, because you wouldn't be able to, you know, for one, get a mortgage, or so I think all of these things need to work in tune with each other. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that I think you explored in the project with looking more into graphene, is that materials don't exist in isolation. There's a full system, not, you know, way beyond the kind of how it's been extracted and produced, and then and what happens to it afterlife, but actually you know, systems around how we guarantee materials, and currently it's very rigid. You know, there's a very rigid system, so potentially that's something that we need to explore, that, you know, the notion that our homes or our cities are more transient, you know, that they live and they die at some point, and you know, we have a kind of continual transient process. Obviously that requires a lot of kind of thinking and development, but yeah, I think we are just at the point where our systems, you know, feel too rigid and brittle, and you know, cracks are appearing. So, and to enable the full capability of this material innovation to thrive, that's also going to have to something that needs to be broached hand in hand.
Yeah. I also wanted to discuss a topic that we've been talking a lot recently, which is the topic of accountability. I think that's something that you know, looking into sort of the environmental issues and sort of as an individual thinking that it's your responsibility, but then also understanding that, you know, there's large corporations and large brands that also hold a massive impact on the planet. How do you view this topic? Who is to be held accountable, and how do we do that? How do you think companies can take responsibility?
Yeah, I think accountability is a really key topic within, you know, looking at material innovation for sustainability, and that these things that you have got to come from a top down and a bottom up approach. So I know before we were talking about transparency, and particularly the capabilities of technology to enable transparency, like blockchain and you know, stakeholders along every element of the life cycle analysis of a material, and, you know, and a product eventually, to be able to input data so that, you know, ultimately we as the citizen that's buying the thing can see what's been involved in terms of the social and the environmental elements as whatever we purchase has been, you know, manufactured. And that's really exciting, because that enables an element of you know, knowledge that was just not there before for us as people, and in turn that enables us to you know, be more informed and more enlightened about where we spend our money and who we support through that. So, you know, we can as individuals explore accountability in terms of, you know, are we, you know, getting our wallet out as a political act, and who do we actually want to support in that. And then, you know, from a legislative perspective, I think that has got to be hand in hand in terms of you know, the current predicament with materials that we are facing, you know, actually completely wearing out particular material sources. We're producing, you know, volumes of waste that the world just cannot deal with. And at what point does you know, does a large corporation actually need to take responsibility for that, to say, and it is starting to happen in some, you know, and it varies on a political level, you know, usually country by country. There has been some amazing things going on with like take back schemes, or, you know, the right to mend, the right to repair, so that I think in France in particular that has been introduced, that all products that have been output have to be able to be repaired, so we're not sort of designing for obsolescence as we have been doing in recent years. So I absolutely think that, sorry, I'm answering in a very wordy way, that the accountability in terms of the materials that we're taking, how we're transforming them, and then what we do with them after life needs to be squarely placed on the corporation. And I was involved in an amazing kind of workshop session looking at how to stem the flow of plastic into the oceans, organised by the Cloisters Forum. And we were basically looking at, the issue of single-use plastic, like why are we still allowed to produce items out of plastic that, are single use, and why are we still allowed to print that little sign when you go and look at how do I dispose of this and it says not currently recyclable? It kind of smacks of like, why are we still allowed to do that? why is any company still allowed to use a material that is not recyclable? And one of the really interesting things that we sort of came up with in the Cloisters Forum meeting was the kind of placing the onus on the manufacturer, on the corporation, to prove that you could only use this material, and obviously that's complicated, being able to justify it being fit for purpose. And because with something like plastics, it's a hugely contentious issue. You couldn't do an outright ban because it's it's advanced our medical capabilities with disposable syringes, for example. So there's some uses that are really, and if you can recycle it and keep it in a closed loop system, then it's an amazing material. But if we're producing plastics and combining them with other materials that then render them unrecyclable, personally I feel we should be at the point that is stamped out. We shouldn't be allowed to do that. So sorry, again I'm waffling, but legislation I think and has a massive role to play in forcing corporations to take accountability for not just the way they make and convert materials, but what happens to the thing that they've made at the end of beyond it going home with the person, but actually taking responsibility for that object past when it's left their stores.
That makes total sense. I mean, I think it's such a complicated topic that it doesn't, I mean, one answer is not the right one. I guess there's so many takes to it, right? I think I might ask you one last question before I let you go, and it's something that I encountered while I was doing the residency and kind of entering this community of sciences, and I realized that there's, within material innovation, there seems to be a lot of secrecy. There's always this obsession with patenting, with owning the material. And I come from it from a different point of view, which is that I personally think that we should be moving more towards an open source, a way more transparent future in which we, share knowledge. But I know that kind of clashes with the idea of capitalizing on certain materials and owning those materials. Do you feel that, open source is something that's growing and that people in industry, but also consumers, we talked a little bit about transparency, but within material innovation, do you think that this is changing? Do you think that the future is probably going to be more open and that we're going to be sharing more knowledge on materials? And that, in my opinion, that's going to pave the way more to having a more sustainable future. But I want to know your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so, that we have to move towards open source models, because we have an ambition that's greater than all of us, to basically save the planet, and in which we are an element, an organism within this biosphere. And so that, as an impetus, hopefully would prove greater than profit. However, that's not often the case. And I mean, there's been some amazing advances in using open source models. Things like, I think it was Tesla that put a lot of their patents out into the public domain and said, we're interested in everybody furthering knowledge in relation to electric cars, rather than, just owning that. And again, I think there's an interesting sense of traction with a conscious citizen that, you know, again, that can build loyalty with a potential customer base. Yeah, and it's always a really difficult thing, because you're balancing, you know, actually how do an individual, how does a company make a living, basically, when you're working in an open source way. So it comes back to also disrupting systems. So if you look at the work of somebody like Dave Hackens, who's done, you know, some really amazing stuff around plastic recycling and really enabling you know, individuals to do their own plastic recycling, so that you almost become like a micro factory in your own home. And so he's creating like the blueprints for machinery that you can construct yourselves, ideally. And, you know, and he's always said, everything I do, I want to be open source. So he funds himself by basically putting himself out on Patreon, which is like a crowdfunding platform, either for individuals or for companies. And there's, you know, more and more people doing that. Lots of writers and journalists I see doing that, saying, look, I'm actually outputting you know, content that is potentially you know, controversial, or rather than being funded by a particular media outlet that, you know, is going to sway my perspective. If you want me to be independent and outspoken, then, you know, support me as an individual. So things like, you know, Patreon and crowdfunding is a really interesting model. And then another person that we've you know, had the pleasure of working with for a number of years, and in fact had a conversation with this week, is Space 10, IKEA's innovation agency, and the way that they, you know, really work in trying to provide examples of best practice in terms of sustainable innovation, and pushing research out into the public domain so that everybody can kind of learn from it and gain from it. And things like, so they've just released a project which is about open source beehives. So there's a kind of a digital blueprint that you can then go on and customize yourself, and then they connect you with a local fabricator so that you can get your bee house constructed. So yeah, in another sense, the impact of an open source way, particularly in partnership with distributed manufacture, and kind of looking at localized micro hubs, you know, that the impact can be incredible, because it then can sort of spread on a global level. So personally, I find, you know, an open source approach the most exciting and you know, integral idea in relation to materials and a sustainable future, definitely.
Good. I love finishing on that note. Okay, I think that's it. I'm gonna let you go. I know these conversations can go on for a really long time, but I'm conscious of time. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me, and, you know, for supporting me during the residency. And yeah, I'll see you next week.
Brilliant. Lovely to see your face. I hope the yellow hasn't given you a headache.
No, it's amazing. It's so refreshing. It's like thank you so much, Kat.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Wilson. How are you doing?
I'm good, Marta. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for joining me on the chat. And I would love for you to give a really short introduction of the work you do and sort of what you're exploring through your practice, basically.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me here. My name is Wilson Oriyama. I work primarily as an artist and a writer, and my main theme is human consumption and its effects on human behavior and the environment. So this is explored through a number of ways, through books, through imagery, through short films and documentaries. I made one called How Toxic Are My Clothes, which came out at the tail end of last year. Aside from that, work as a consultant sometimes, and most recently, I'm a co-founder in this 4-year social change initiative called Regenerative Futures.
Which I'm going to ask you about later on, because it's actually really exciting. I've been following it recently.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess my first question is, your work focuses a lot on the fashion industry, right? And I guess like it is probably like the second most pollutant industry in the world after the oil, I think it is, if I'm not mistaken. How, and you position yourself as an anti-consumerist through your work, and you have a lot of that discourse. How did that happen? How did you get into this industry and have such a position in a way against like a big part of this industry, which is consuming it?
So first, I feel like the anti-consumerist tag is a slight misnomer, because at the core of everything's existence, the primary goal is to survive, which comes about by the act of consuming. So I would say, rather than anti-consumerism, I'm at a point where I'm against overconsumption, and I think there's a lot of, because there's a lot of benefits to consumption in terms of that we require it to survive. It helps various communities and nations develop and grow and stabilize their economies and citizens' well-being. Well, if all intentioned well. But I think overconsumption is the issue, when it's the excessive depleting of resources purely to turn a profit with no focus on anything beyond the finances of the situation. You're not focusing on what the next 10 to 50 years looks like, or what the well-being of your fellow citizens looks like, or anything of the sort. So, but I would say within fashion, I kind of stumbled into it. So I got stopped in the street about just over 6 years ago, and someone asked me to participate in a model shoot, and because I was working in a completely different field, I just thought, why not take up the opportunity? And then as things slowly snowballed, I became a bit more entrenched in the industry, and you see the way people work and how things are produced and wasted and so on and so forth. And then, as due to my own interest, I kind of dived into making art a bit. So after assisting a friend, I started taking photos, and that led to an exhibition called Weight, which was around our as the general citizen's relationship with waste and waste disposal teams. So the idea that we can casually throw an empty food package in the street and someone will clean it up the next day. So, and then we can keep doing that. So it was kind of a conversation about how we get from the birthplace of these materials to them being used, to them being thrown out and left for waste, and where that goes, and what the build-up of that is like. So from there, which was around maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I've just kind of slowly started building up a repository of conversation around that through different mediums. And then with that, also it tied in, and because of my position in the fashion industry, it just tied in. So the conversation was a very organic one that I came to just naturally speaking about these things, because I don't want to be disingenuous and pretend like, hey, I'm going to speak about this topic in one area and then completely ignore another area that I operate in. So that's...
That's really amazing, actually, like how, you know, you get pulled into the fashion industry without really even being part of it, and then suddenly, you know, you've made this like your practice, which you're currently pursuing at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
It's I guess then, how, because through your work, am I right to say you still model sometimes?
No, I wouldn't. I haven't. The only times that people see me model now is only because, say, I might be an ambassador for a brand and we require a shoot. But at the same time, because you can, I don't know, like you can look on Instagram and just scroll past and it just looks like you're just modeling. But honestly, I haven't done a shoot that wasn't tied to me being interviewed or me doing some other type of work with a brand in over a year.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it'd be disingenuous at this point to kind of just baselessly model for brands that I have no relationship with and I can't track their efforts with regards to sustainability and producing materials.
That's amazing. Yeah. So I guess then have you been able to have conversations through the work you've done then with the different brands that you've collaborated with, or through your poetry, which we're going to talk about in a second, about the areas that you're investigating and your position in those areas, and kind of, I guess, it's so complex, the fashion industry, and I guess people have very different opinions of how things have to be done. So how do you manage those conversations through your collaborations?
So I think it's, like you said, the fashion industry is so large that you can't expect everything to move in a single particular way, because it's not one size fits all. It's like that image of when people say you can't, it's like the education system doesn't suit all character types. Like, it's like trying to fit a triangle, circle, or I don't know, hexagonal peg through a square hole. It's like, it's only going to work in certain cases. So, and so with that in mind, it's more about working with the particular brand and engaging in conversations in a way that is relevant to how they've made their brand, where they source from, how their organizations are set up, and moving forward from there. So, but honestly, conversations are really positive. There's a lot of times where people reach out to me and ask me to do work, and it's like, I can't work with you based on such and such and such and such. And they're very perceptive, and there's a lot of work which is actually put forward to actually spring to encourage change and actually make change happen. So in terms of the brands that I've worked with, like, say, I'm an ambassador for Timberland at the moment. There's been a lot of work done there, which they've also spearheaded themselves in terms of using, mostly producing their stuff from recycled materials now, actually also donating and supporting to the communities that produce their materials, and just various other methods, changing the physical retail spaces that they hold to be more considerate in their methods and means. Even say, I've done some research and work with North Face, which partly wasn't. It was more so about traveling and communicating that, but it was founded. It was built up off of this concept where they're working with Spiber, I think, to produce materials from artificial spider's thread or silk, or some material that reflects it, which is more durable, but also more, I know it's a loaded term, but it's more sustainable. So yeah, so I'd say conversations are going well, and because also I'm slowing down because as a model you can work with, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 brands a year, and it's like, but at this point I probably work with 1 or 2 brands a year at most, and even then the context is very different. So say I've been working with Swarovski quite a lot in the last year or so, also helping them launch their conscious design program, which is so conscious design is their language which they're using to kind of encourage people to build more consciously and more, again, sorry, loaded term, sustainably. But so I've been so they launched a program in partnership with Central St. Martin's, and I helped deliver the program, and also did lead the competition, working with the students, and also picking up winners, and they're now being supported in various ways.
I can agree to that, because I was there when you presented. So amazing work. It was really good. And maybe let's go back to the term sustainability, because I've actually been having issues myself within my own practice when I say the word sustainable, because I want to use it, but I also know that it's way more complicated than that, and I sometimes feel uncomfortable with the language. So I was actually reading a bit of the work that you've done, and sort of I came across this piece that you had written, and you were talking about sustainability and how you understand how things are interconnected, and you were talking about it in a way that felt really, really holistic. So maybe question to you. How should we define sustainability, and what are the terms that we should be using?
I think we'll need to use various terms. I feel that because of how efficient the brain is at simplifying things, when in many cases they may not, or in some cases they shouldn't be simplified, we like to use catch-all terms to just kind of encapsulate many things. So it's like all junk food is not the same, or all healthy food is not the same. It's dependent on your body type, what your pre-existing conditions are, where you are. And in the same way, sustainability in the UK is very different to sustainability in Madagascar or Australia or China or Latin America. It's not in that different sets of solutions are needed, and somewhat different frameworks are needed to approach their models, as they also have varying numbers of population or food that they have access to, or weather, environmental conditions, and so on. So with regards to sustainability, I could say it's an overall I would say a loose definition I can think of on the spot would be an overall model for a group or nation's approach to the use and replenishment of resources in a considered way that focuses on continued use for an extended amount of time.
I'm really happy I just recorded that, because we're going to redefine that word. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, but if I'm wrong, I'd love for someone to pull me out. So that's, or pull my leg. So yeah.
No, but I think what you said in terms of sustainability in different countries, different communities, different cities, it's very different. And I do agree that I think we're in a time where it feels that everything becomes, a stat, it becomes a poke quote. We need that sort of overarching word to define things that are actually really complex.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but you're an amazing user of words, let's say, and I've actually ordered your book, because I'm really curious to see how your poems come about, and maybe I'd like to know how you chose that medium to express, let's say, your positions and your thoughts, because it's quite unusual to come across, like within the fashion industry.
Yeah.
I haven't really found that many creatives that are working with poetry to talk about sustainability. I know few. It's not. So I'm really curious to know how that came about and how you're developing that practice.
So with the exhibition that I did a few years back, it was only for about 2 or 3 days, but it unfortunately landed on the same weekend as a music festival and a terrorist attack somewhere in London. So it did not, numbers-wise, it was okay, but it wasn't enough to. And then also there were a lot of people who were saying they couldn't come for various reasons. So I was just thinking, how could I continue this conversation? So I was telling people, I'm going to put all of the images and stuff into a book. So it started out as images, and then over the course of 3 or 4 months, so from like June to October or November, it changed from images to having images and words as well. And it was like a great piece of text that I copied and I'd broken into pieces across the book. But then as the development came further, I realized whether I sell it or not, I'm going to have to license the text to use. So then I thought, let me tell this story in my own way by just, it was a book called, it was a page from a book called Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. So there was one story in there about this town of trash, which I thought was very apt. And then I just created my own story around that. And from that, I then thought, I can do a whole book of text. I left behind the images and then found it was a lot easier to self-publish with just text. And and then built it from there. Yeah, sorry, was there another question in that I missed?
No, it's good. It's I was just asking how you started looking into poetry, and if that's something that you originally already did, and then suddenly you started to develop it a bit more. But it seems like it's more of a process that's evolving, and
Yeah.
you're okay with using different types of medium to express your thoughts, I think.
I think you have to, because on a personal note, you're never going to tell your full story through one medium. Like I can't express my every single feeling through just talking in words. So sometimes it has to be written down. Sometimes it has to be acted with gestures or performances, and other times it could even be by sending you a song. So and on the reverse, we don't all take information in the same way. In the same way, when we're in school, you're asked if you're auditory, kinesthetic, or visual learner, and it's like you have to in order to reach as many people as possible, you have to present your ideas in as many ways. So it's not about repeating everything. So like, it's not just saying, hey, I'm going to repeat this text in image form. It's more, what do I want to, if I want to communicate this idea, what's the best way in communicating through an image or through a video or through text? And it's just kind of having that approach. So, and even through making, say, initiatives, which it could also be considered an art form or projects like that. I think that's you have to be rigorous and flexible in your approach.
Yeah. Cool. I want to maybe go a little bit back to the topic of overconsumption, because I actually, my background is in fashion design, so I was studying fashion design at some point, and I kind of got a bit sidetracked. I studied on the material futures course as well, basically to get away from fashion, and I think you do express a lot of the points that I was thinking of when I started the master's, and also still now. And I think one of the things that you mentioned in your documentary, How Toxic Are My Clothes, is this broken relationship between us and our clothes. I think there's a point where you mentioned that, and I think, like, I work a lot with materials, and I do a lot of research in materials, and I think there's conversations around that as well, that basically there's this disconnection between the things we have around us and where they come from, and I just want to see your position with that. Do you think that perhaps building a better relationship and a better awareness with what we actually have around us, where it comes from, understanding who's producing it, who is sourcing it, do you feel that is also, it's a great part or a key to actually developing more sustainable consumption and maybe reducing overconsumption?
Absolutely. 100%. I think that we should be informed as much as possible. There's, even as you see in the news at this moment, there's debates over what should be taught and what should be shared. And I think, say for example, my own journey has, as the quote goes, if you know better, you'll do better. So and through my own journey, my actions are only because I know more about the things that I speak about than I did before. So I think it's about embedding a curiosity and understanding about all of these various processes into as many people as possible and in as many ways. So through the education system, through what we show on TV, through what is through the things that we support or share to friends. There's typically this idea that we can be ignorant to most things. And that's not to say that we need to speak on every issue at all times. It's more so, at least we do need to be informed so that we can collectively move together, because if I have an understanding of say, the human body and what type of combinations there are. Like, say, for example, a lot of people don't know that if you lack, like, the human body, and it's is like a chain of different things. So, like, say, if you're lacking in vitamin D, your body won't be able to process calcium. And if your body, so won't be able to process calcium. And if it can't process calcium, it can't do so on and so forth. So there's like a chain of things. So in the same way, it's like, if I'm uninformed about something, it also means that there's a broken chain in terms of how we learn and grow and develop as a collective society. So I feel like we need to all be well informed and try to be as balanced as possible. I know it's not greatly possible, because I think like some people say, the last time there was someone who knew everything was maybe over 150 years ago. And we've kind of created these silos in different spaces where it's like, I'm an expert in one thing and someone else is an expert in another thing. But it's more about how can we increase the base level of what we all collectively know and do. But that's a very difficult task and it will take a very long time. But it's something we should work towards for sure.
I'm wondering, whose responsibility is it? Because I struggle with that question a lot as well, in terms of, you know, it's such a complex topic. And actually a part of the one of the other conversation I had through this platform was with an old colleague of mine, and she works for a shoe company, and we were talking about like how, in the same way that you're saying that you become an expert, and it's almost like the communication is lost and there's like so many steps of the way, and the same happens with the creative process. So, you know, we have these massive brands, and then it's not only the massive brands, it's also the consumers, it's also the legislation, it's also, so maybe it's a really hard question and we can't really answer it right now, but do you think it's just, is it everyone's responsibility, or do you feel that some parties are more accountable than others?
The first thing is definitely everyone's responsibility. Once you and then later you can get into who's more responsible, but even then that's contextual. So because a lot of times once you can kind of put the blame or pressure onto someone else, it means that you're acquitted or free of action. But I want to look at there's this great of course the people have a lot of different positions on fur, but there's this company called Saga Furs, and they are based out of Finland, and they're the largest fur auction house in Europe, I think. And of course, you know that the fur industry has been suffering through a lot of difficulties due to the changing of public perception on fur and the treating of animals and so on and so forth. However, this has also pushed this industry to really vocalize and actually make change within their systems to make sure that it's robust and, as again, loaded term, sustainable as possible. So in this, there's say, for example, Saga Furs have 4 levels of certification, that they have to follow. So which part they have to follow directly. There's one that their farmers have to adhere, or a few their farmers have to adhere to. And they're working with government agencies. So let's say every single aspect of this, of their supply chain, from the farmer production to even how they source their food for their animals, it's produced by bio-waste farms. And then the waste produced by the animals is also taken to these bio plants to be used as energy for more processing of various other products. And it's used to actually power the country. Of course, Finland only has around 5 million citizens, but it's a great model that can be looked at and replicated in part in various places. So I think it's about taking that's a great example for me, because it's about everyone taking on responsibility, from the industry leaders to the various aspects of government, because a lot of times people feel like the head of the country can say this needs to change, and that's it. When government is broken into various different parts and organizations, it requires action from the leaders in the industry and taking ownership and saying, hey, we're going to work together to build a somewhat actionable approach to being more responsible. It requires the producers of the materials, and then also where the waste goes, what other energy properties can support. So essentially, and even then it requires a consumer understanding, so that there's not essentially pushback or when the pushback is considered, it's understood and carefully acted out upon. Because sometimes we naturally hear things and immediately we respond that that's a bad thing. As in, people can say, oh, we need to stop making books because it uses paper, but they don't think about the energy costs of, or the material used to make, like, say, a phone or a tablet, or the electricity usage, and what how there's servers online all the time in order to allow us the internet, which helps with, say, this conversation as well. So it's about informing everyone. Of course, I've kind of sped through parts of that, but it's about informing everyone at every level, every level that about the rest of the system and how we can also help each other and also need to work together in order to enact change. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely agree. Maybe I'll wrap up a little bit with, I'd love to hear more about Regenerative Futures, the platform that you recently started. And yeah, what is this amazing platform?
So Regenerative Futures it started out as a collaboration between the World Frontiers Forum and Irregular Labs, which is a Gen Z think tank. So the idea came as there's not really much attention given to young people, and they're not supported in their ideas as much. Otherwise, we would see more platforms given to young people, whether in terms of the projects they're making or what they actually have to say. Because typically, everyone grows up being ignored by the older generation, but then they grow up and do the same to their younger generation. So we're all about trying to facilitate intergenerational conversation and collaboration in the form of places to speak. So I'm probably not allowed to say this, but there's various other phases. So we've got a summit, which should be happening later this year, which will be held in a very interesting way and various other aspects. But the key thing the Regular Labs World Frontiers Forum, I was then brought on, and through working with them on it, I was then brought on as a co-founder. And the idea is it's a 4-year project, and each year we'll kick off with the Regenerative List, which is the call out to find 100 pioneers from across the world who are creating innovative ideas or projects in any field, but they have to be regenerative in nature. So this is actually, we could say it's replenishing or giving back in some way to their communities or the world at large. So that's, I can go anywhere with say, expanding more, but was there a particular question with regards to regenerative?
No, I just, because obviously you recently started, and I've seen a few of those videos come in. So when is the call finished already, or when is the
No, so the call out is still on until June 30th.
June 30th, okay.
Yeah, and then from there of the 100 we select, 75 will be featured in a sustainability report that we're working on with Gucci at the moment. 25 of those will be assigned to a mentor who's an industry leader. So this is which will be relevant to the Pioneers project and helping them to succeed or achieve their given goals in a set time frame. And 5 of those will be featured in the UN Participation Challenge, which is essentially a flip around of what typically goes on. So this will include 5 of our pioneers actually mentoring world leaders from the UN for a set amount of time in order to help inspire youth-led change and see what actually changes if there's a different voice kind of making our leaders actionable, or what kind of direction do we take. So this will happen during the first year, and then it will continue for 4 years, because I think that a lot of times that people say, oh, hey, we're going to do an initiative, and it just goes on forever. And as opposed to addressing the idea that you set out, it becomes more of a, how can we keep the lights on? So it's like, when you set out with an intention to have an indefinite stay, it leads to working in opposition to actually achieving your goals, because if you really want to achieve something, then it shouldn't, or in some cases, you shouldn't. What am I trying to say? You shouldn't want to be around too long. Yeah, it's like you should say, hey, this is what I want to do. This is when I set out to do it by, and then after that, I'm on to the next thing. Otherwise, there's a question about how much change you actually really want to create, and as opposed to rather sitting in an ivory tower.
Yeah, no, I mean, the idea of this longevity, and also what you're saying, that I think for me, the interesting side as well is like the communication side. And often I agree with you. Still consider myself young, maybe not as young as like the most recent activists, but I did miss like the chance to, like, you know, discuss my views with someone that had been in industry for a very long time. And I think there's so much to learn from each other on both ends. I think we learn so much from people that have infinite experience in you know, in industry, but also in you know, in craft and in different sectors. But the other way around is also true. Like, I think, you know, older generations can also learn from us. So yeah, I really love it. I'm going to send it over to all of my students in Material Futures. Hopefully they all apply.
Thank you. Fingers crossed. I hope they do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. I think I'm going to let you go. I mean, I could literally be talking with you for another hour about this, because I think like your work really touches on so many different topics, and I think you can really like hone into them. But yeah, I don't think we have another hour to do this. But yeah, maybe in another time.
Yeah, hopefully we can do this soon. I look forward to that.
Cool. Hey, thank you so much, Wilson. And really good luck with Regenerative Futures and like all the other work you're doing.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Until next time.
Hey, Angela.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm going to quickly introduce you and how I know you, and then I'll just ask you to give a very short introduction of yourself and your work. So I met Angela on the Material Futures course, and it was a really exciting and fun time. And over the years, we've kept friends, and also we've always kept in touch about materials, and we've always had conversations about future of materials. But maybe you can explain a little bit more what you do.
Of course. Thank you, Marta, for inviting me. It's great to be here. Yeah, like as you said, we met each other like in Material Futures. That was sort of the path to that was like my background in product design and industrial design, where I really more wanted to go into materials and specify, and specifically in the future of materials. So like as it said already, after that I really wanted to implement the possibilities in the industry. So I'm now working in the footwear industry, trying to improve materials in its performance, in its longevity, and its sustainability, at the end of the day in its price. Yeah, so far very quick on what I'm doing now.
Nice. So I think I'm just going to start off by asking a few questions, and I think the first one, and one that I think you and I actually talk a lot about, and it's always kind of the biggest challenges, let's say, when working with materials and in industry, is that you know, during the residency, for example, I was looking at like developing new materials and kind of finding natural or bio alternatives to synthetics. And obviously the main issue here is that often these amazing degradable materials can't withstand industry standards. So could you maybe talk to us about maybe the processes and the tests that these materials have to go through before actually becoming a product?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot. I mean, it depends very much on the industry as well, and on the requirements that the materials or the product at the end of the day needs to fulfill. Basically, it comes down to two parts. One is the chemical part and one is the physical part. In the physical part, very much including abrasion, water absorption, corrosion, all these things. While in the chemical part, it's much more sort of specific on like what chemicals are tested or what ingredients. Like with natural materials, there are not as many guidelines yet. So, you know, we test on the chemicals that we know. The world is very big. So yeah, you have to test specifically. And of course, not to forget the third one, in the footwear industry, or specifically the fashion industry in general, you need to do wear tests. So even if you have a perfect result in chemistry or in physical, it still needs to prove that it's good on the foot itself, that it can perform in where it is supposed to be.
Do you actually do these tests on site, or is this something that you work collaboratively with the factories, or how does that process look like in terms of logistics and placement?
Both. There is, of course, a certain amount of people with different sizes, foot sizes. You know, you need to test in different size, so you can make sure, all the sizes are fine. We have our own innovation lab, of course, testing lab on site. I think most brands have. Mostly the supplier from the material is already doing pre-tests. If within a finished build product or within the material, and then like the company itself is like testing it one more time to make sure it really fulfills their standards. I mean, on the lab it's one thing, but then you have to go out and you just have to walk around outside or test it like in the sport you want to use it, or it needs to be in reality as well. So yeah.
Do you get lots of sad, unexpected results where you invested all this time researching this material and then all of a sudden, you put it through the test and then the final test doesn't go through?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when it happens at the final test, that is very frustrating, of course. Most of the time, it fortunately happens earlier already, so you can make sure it's not happening at the final test. But yeah, of course, I mean, there's in the whole development, there's a lot of frustration and you have to sort of pick it up again. So yeah, like do it one more time. Let's do it better. Let's try this way, the other way. You have to be very creative to think of different ways. Most of the time it is a fight, but it's like a fight we want to fight, or that is worth it. Yeah, to make sure it has like its best performance.
And maybe can you talk about more? Let's say you find an emerging material, and I think it's really nice that I interviewed today, because I think your starting point in the career was very much with experimental materials and you're working closely with scientists, and then I think you really quickly went into industry, and I think obviously you know the two sides of the story where you're just very excited about developing these new materials, but then they have to go through all this process before they're implemented. So when you have a new material, what has to happen for it to be accepted and implemented in the market? So what sort of regulations does it need to comply with, and be ready for example, footwear industry to use already in a commercial aspect?
Yeah, I think that very much came from as well from my own fight with my own developed materials, that I kind of wanted to go into the industry and see let's help all these designers and let's make this happen, because sometimes, as you said, there's such a big gap between the materials that are really great, and then the standards that needs to be fulfilled. So yeah, most of the time there are like two levels. One of is the law level, of course, where the European Union as well says, you know, from this chemical you can only have this certain amount, or from this or that, or like, yeah, different ingredients sort of that are regulated. On the other hand, it's also guidelines within the company that need to be fulfilled. Like some companies have much higher guidelines and restrictions that the law would actually be necessary. And I think specifically in the fashion or footwear industry, it's so important to have these regulations. And yeah, we're sort of mainly high valued brands or have mostly higher guidelines than the law. And that is so important to think about it, because that goes into your skin, that goes into your body, and like you want it to like pass all these tests.
Yeah. And in terms of all the tests that you were talking about before, have you encountered any issues with working with these sort of new materials, like I'm going to say biomaterials and also natural fibers? Because I guess the footwear industry, and you know, in sports especially, it's one of the ones that has the most tests, right? The most endurance tests. So how different is it to work with these natural materials versus, let's say, synthetics or petroleum-based materials?
Yeah, the difficulty is very often not in the process, but really in the test performance. Or like you can all the time, or very often, you can process them as in this, I cannot say it's easy, but like in the same process as you would non-natural materials. But yeah, specifically in the performance, like there is also so important to keep in mind the materials we use now, they are very often way too good for what they're actually supposed to do. I mean, yes, in sports and in a lot of products, performance is absolutely key and the most important. However, most of the materials we're using are actually surviving us, and even like surviving the material, the product usability by far. So like material lifespan is way too long than the product lifespan. Yeah, so that's that sets the industry standards. So when you have like these chemical plastics that are like amazing in abrasion, amazing in performance, amazing in energy return, and in the soul, amazing in you name it, then the clients or the suppliers or the producer or the brand, they're expecting the same performance from a natural material, even when we actually, in a lot of cases, we could say, okay, it's fine, the abrasion is actually not as well, because it looks maybe used earlier, but it doesn't mean that it tears, or it doesn't mean that it, you know, it wouldn't be good anymore, especially when we use certain products, yeah, just for a short time. And it's fine the material falls apart at some point. I mean, not that it risks any safety, of course, safety is the most important. But yeah, I think that is the most thing to keep in mind, that sort of the expectation we have of the performance is sometimes too high for what it actually we need to. That makes it difficult to use natural fibers or natural materials.
I think this actually leads me very well onto the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is actually about the end of life, because during the residency as well, I had lots of conversations about, you know, when you design a new material, is it your responsibility as well to envision, you know, what the end of life of that material is, and kind of bring that into the design of the objects or the products that you're working with. And I was wondering if these are conversations that you also have. I think you highlighted it really well right now when you say that there's certain materials that sort of outlive us as well. Do you think then that it's more of a systemic problem of like not knowing how to repurpose those materials or how to reintroduce them into the system so that we can make the most of them?
Yeah, or like it's not as much in mind during the design process as it should be. Like I think it should be much more important that designers specifically when designing a product really think about the whole lifespan of a material, and also what happens with it afterwards. Is it bio-based? Is it already recycled? Or also very important, is it recyclable? So you can do it afterwards. But like it's so much more important during the design of a product that it's not the product itself, but the whole system that gets designed, really from like, where is the material coming from? How is it used? Where does it go afterwards? And without landing into the ocean at some point. That should be definitely be more of a focus point.
So basically, is it like, we should be sort of rethinking the workplace as well and how these departments are interconnected? Because I remember having a chat with you at some point when we were talking about industry and how often, you have all these departments that don't necessarily communicate between each other. And it seems quite important that they do, right? In terms of designing one product. It's not just one product, it's the whole thing behind it.
Absolutely. And very often, because you have different parties and different steps, like every party wants to make their job best, and sometimes you don't care what the next party is doing, or you have the raw material coming from somewhere, the supplier sort of making the material, the production making the product, and somewhere in between is the designer sort of actually sort of saying, okay, what we're using, but none of them, or like too rarely, they are also thinking about what is the step before and what is the step afterwards, and the communication in between. And when we throw it away, it's out of our sight, it's out of our mind. It's just like, get somewhere, instead of that I think companies, specifically in fashion, like one of the most polluting industries, they need to take responsibility and also need to make sure, hey, what happens with our products afterwards? They need to be accountable for using materials that have consequences later on the planet.
And I was reading more in depth, let's say, when I was designed the prototype of a shoe that would potentially incorporate material developed with graphene, and I was really looking into, let's say, sneakers and how complex it is to even think of recycling it, just because there's so much amount of materials mixed together, and you wouldn't even know where to start. So how, in terms of design, I know you're way more specialized right now in the materials development side, but in terms of design, how do you think we could fix that? That we would be able to say, okay, this is a product that we know how to recycle, that can be recycled. How do we do that?
If I would know that, I'd be very I wish I would know that. I mean, I think there are a few companies already starting with great projects that are leading in the right way. Like, is it just making one shoe from just like one material that is fully recyclable? I think that's a great start. But also, making the shoe or like the product just fully from recycled material that can be recycled again, even if it's different materials that can be taken apart again, so they can be recycled differently. Or as well, just like making it from any bio material, so you could actually literally throw it into the environment and it would degrade and would just disappear. I mean, it would be great if it would be as easy as it just disappears. Of course, that also releases certain gases. It's not that easy, but if we could really make from either different parts we could more easily take apart, or more bio-based material or fully recyclable, these are all great starts.
So I guess maybe I can jump onto the next one, which is you've always been really focused around environmental sustainability. I think, even when we were studying together, it was always a big thing for you. And I think you've sort of embedded that in all of your material experimentations. And I believe right now in industry, that's what you're trying to do as well. How do you think that industry is facing these environmental challenges? And do you think that the necessary changes are happening at the speed that they should do? Or do you feel, working in an industry, that we have still a lot of catching up to do?
The latest. I mean, while I'm an optimist, I just try to be an optimist. Yeah, like I believe everyone gives their best, everyone tries. There are good starts happening, but sometimes it's a bit time for a realism, and I believe there can be still is a lot of improvement that should be happening. There's still a lot to do in like more material efficiency, material lifespan, recyclability. Like there is still a lot to push, definitely.
And can you maybe tell us, if you can, any sort of materials that you've come across recently that you feel are super promising in terms of like sustainable credentials, leaving aside, the fact that if you, for example, had a shoe made out of a mono material that's synthetic, you could potentially recycle it endlessly. But let's not talk about that. I'm curious to know new materials that you've come across that you're like, wow, so exciting, love it, want to work with this.
I mean, there fortunately are lots of things happening. There is a lot of, I'm excited about with natural fibers. I mean, there are a few brands that came up with textiles fully from natural fibers, from fruits, from trees, from any kind of plants. That is definitely all very excitable. But as well, I'm personally very excited about the leather that can be tanned without water. I think that is also a big step in the industry, specifically in the footwear industries. But there is so much more sort of, I like personally, I love as well this very, from a rare material, rare waste material. But they all would have sort of big potential to be scaled up. But are guys just too little yet to really use.
And another thing that I think you slightly touched upon now, which leads me on to what I want to ask you next, and it's that often, in these conversations, it's all about the material and all about material sustainability, and then sometimes we forget to actually talk about the manufacturing processes. And I know that's something that you're definitely really involved with, not only the manufacturing processes probably of the products, but also of the actual materials. How is the footwear industry dealing with this? Is there an attention to that side of the story? So looking at manufacturing processes, like you were mentioning, the leather that can be tanned without water. Is there a shift to look at processes which are in fact, more environmentally but also socially sustainable?
I mean, there is definitely a lot of happening. I mean, I personally know mainly the production in Europe. And that is actually from what I saw, production of high standards. I think it's not sort of or less worrying with like the very big brands that really have to also defend themselves against the pressure of the media and social, and they really sort of need to make sure they are producing within the guidelines. But I think there is a huge area of like middle-sized or sort of kind of big brands, or also small brands that just do not have the potential to actually know their supply chain really from A to Z, and they do not have the potential to really visit all the factories they are working with. Do not have the potential to put pressure on suppliers or factory owners to work within the regulations, but just are in the big price efficiency pressure. Or it's much more about the look and the outside and just like putting something out fast, instead of really knowing exactly what goes in there and where it comes from. I mean, and it's also, of course, as well, one that we talked about, sort of the working together between the sourcing and department and the design department, just to know each other's work and to know each other's challenges, and to make sure that we really also the manufacturing process is all right.
Yeah, supervised. Yeah, I mean, there's amazing initiatives, I think, with I'm going to say this wrong, not bitcoins, crypto. I can never say the word, but basically making it more transparent, right? By blockchain. That's it. Never get it right. I'm not a tech person. But yeah, so I think there's a really exciting initiatives, but it seems to be that often, as you say, you know, some of the smaller brands or middle-sized brands, they don't have access to this sort of thing, and then it's harder to actually implement in the process and to really know exactly where your products are being produced or even where your materials are being sourced. But do you feel that there is an increase, let's say, in a demand, let's say, in transparency? Do you feel that in industry there's a need or a request for things to be more transparent now?
Yeah, there should be. I mean, like, as like the big brands are actually making a start of it. Like, you can find on many shoes, you can already find a QR code. Like in a lot of clothes, you can find a QR code. They're really like lots of brands that you can actually see the supply chain as a consumer, and that you can see where's the raw material coming from, etc. I mean, there's definitely a push in this direction, and it should be more. What we should not forget is that we are living in a very privileged world where we can afford, and we can also afford these brands. There are still like a lot of amount of people in this world that just get access to TV, that just get access to electricity or meat or things we are very used to. And when they finally can buy fashionable stuff, like it's kind of the least of their problem, where it's actually coming from or where it's going to end up. And I think, it's responsibility of everyone, especially like the middle-sized or like small brands, where it should be a little bit less of profit, but a little bit more of responsibility, and make it right from the beginning. So like all these people that have new access or like that's like maybe cannot afford it yet, they're not making the same mistakes as we did at the end of the day. That they don't need to improve at some point, but they are already now can buy clothes and footwear that is from a responsible source.
Yeah. Do you feel then that is there a growing demand, let's say, from customers, or at least like in your sector, is there a growing consciousness towards the environment and towards, let's say, social responsibility in factories or even in any of the production process or making of the materials, etc.?
In our bubble, yes. In our sort of our age group, our generation is definitely much more demanding of these things, are much more conscious, and they want it more. While I deal a lot, with people that are in the industry for like 30, 40, 50 years, and we are coming with like, but now I want to have this recyclable. They're like, but then like first you need to have it more durable, you need to have it better looking, more easy processing, and more price efficient. There is not really sort of as much as the awareness as it should be. But as I think, you know, with the new generation coming, with our generation starting to get in charge a bit more, that is definitely growing, in our environment.
Yeah, hopefully, you know, I mean, with everything that's happening right now, I think there's definitely a lot of action and voices coming out that I think are really pushing sort of the boundaries of what used to be accepted, let's say, which is great. And I think as well within the fashion industry, over the past, let's say 5, even 10 years, I think there's been a raise in the awareness around, let's say, the production systems, where the materials are coming from. I mean, it's a minefield, really. And I think maybe the last question I'll ask you, and I'll let you go, thanks for your time, is maybe a bit more related to the fact that I sort of, through the project, through the residency, I realized that without technology, the project wouldn't exist. And, you know, without technology, probably we wouldn't be able to identify certain materials or work with certain materials or even produce certain materials. Do you feel that, and this is probably a totally personal question for you, do you feel that technology is the key to finding alternatives and manufacturing processes, or is it just part of the equation, let's say?
Definitely. Yeah. I think like, I mean, it depends on your definition of technology, but technology sort of includes really, more efficient materials, really from the beginning to the end, but also, more efficient manufacturing processes. Yeah, absolutely. That is the key. And also, like, you know, project like yours, and from a lot of material future designers and material designers, it's so important that these projects are there, and they give an input, and they give an inspiration to the industry, and really opens a lot of eyes. And so people can actually, like, fantasize about, or like, not only fantasize, implement things that they would have thought they would be out of reach. And definitely with advanced technology, we can reach these processes, we can reach these goals.
Final question. Have you worked with nanotechnology ever?
With what?
Nanotechnology.
Yes, like on leather, definitely, and like mainly on the leather surface. We use nanotechnology for water resistance, mainly.
Nice.
But
right.
People, I think it's still very abstract.
Yes, I mean, definitely one of the challenges of the residency was kind of addressing the fact that lots of people haven't heard of nanotechnology, and also when you tell people that you've created or that you've identified a material that's like 1 atom thick, it's really hard to, it's all a thing about scale, I guess, that it's not something that you can tangibly engage with in a way. So I think that creates a lot of disconnection between the user or the public with the actual material. So it's an interesting exercise to sort of bring that to a level where everyone can engage with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like sort of material designers in a different industry, it's also really, or I see it as sort of a task or myself as well, to make these connections, to introduce things that are very new and very advanced to the industry, to implement it.
Amazing. Okay, I don't know how long we've been actually, but I think I'll probably let you go. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, I'm really excited to see what you'll be making next. And I know there's a lot of secrecy around the products that you make, but I'm always excited when you can actually show something to see it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.